right. Well, that was a lot of job descriptions, and of all the job descriptions that basically fit my practice, I would imagine comics would be the one. And for me, this is where it all started, 1996, New World's anthology, where I co-created a world of two different alien races, basically trying to survive. And this gave way to ghost stories, just stories where it took place in an abbey during the French Revolution, or in a graveyard in Savannah, Georgia. And being able to bounce from subject matter to subject matter like this was, again, an amazing experience for myself as a storyteller. This is my vampire phase, where I was able to do illustration work for White Wolf Games and Vampire the Masquerade. My brother, by the way, never looked so cool in a leather jacket, leaping over buildings. But it's one of those worlds that I had the ability to also partake in. This also led to my zombie phase, where all of a sudden we have hunters basically taking out zombies of every kind on every part of the globe. And again, it's just one of those great experiences, because when you're trying to tell these stories, whether it's through a single image or multiple images, like in this case, my 1920s adventure stories, that kind of sort of mimics, like Tommy guns and biplanes and, folks who deal with magic. The key to it is to immerse yourself in these worlds, no matter how different and how varied they can possibly be. So this led eventually to a high watermark in my career, which is working for DC Comics in Batman, or on the Batman character specifically. So being able to jump into the comic book world was just a treat. Growing up with this character from Adam West and Burt Ward, but doing obviously my take on it. And this is a series called Officer Down that I created 7 covers for. They all take place in the same alleyway, but more importantly, they tell a story. So the alleyway itself becomes another way, another character, to tell again. The story of Commissioner Gordon eventually retiring from the force. Here is from the Versus card game, and shows you some of the other characters I was able to play around with, from Darkseid to Superman to Black Canary and so forth. But again, it's a fantastic world, a world where anything's possible. People can fly, people have, amazing abilities. And so going back to basically the real world with Queen and Country by the great Greg Rucka, about this spy who basically has to live or work in MI6 and isn't, obviously the happiest person in the world. Again, that allowed me to kind of sort of really think about quieter stories when all was said and done. And all this work is collaborative work, from Queen and Country to Skinwalker on the right-hand side. And with Skinwalker, it's a procedural where I basically, track a serial killer who's able to change his visage every time he kills. And eventually this comes into my own storytelling, where I created a supernatural thriller called Bonds, where this young hero, her father is assassinated, and it's up to her to basically track down and bring to justice, the folks responsible for his death. But in doing so, every soul that she snuffs out ends up being a tattoo on her body. And so as this story continues, there's more and more of her body that gives way to, again, these marks. And so it's her job to basically come back from this, somehow to figure out a way to redeem herself, so that, again, everything is, equalized. And this was a really difficult story to create. It took a long time. There was a lot of effort that went into it. But it was just a great, training for kind of the next phase of my life, which works in conjunction with my wife, Gwen Thompson, the super talented cartoonist herself, in Beautiful Scars. And here is a story about a grandfather and his granddaughter. And the grandfather has these scars along his body, and by telling the stories on how he received these scars, the granddaughter's mind and imagination opens up. And so here you'll see how the book basically is created. On the top tier is his recollections from World War I as a fighter pilot, and her reaction to his stories in the bottom, which basically deals with princesses and dragons and knights and trolls when all is said and done. And what makes these stories, at least for me, work, is being able to put yourself, into the subject matter as deeply as you can through research and through imagination. One part research, one part imagination. And with the planes, for example, your planes had better look like World War I planes fighting, or else you're going to hear it, from somebody. But more importantly, or just as important, the dragons, for example, and the princesses, they have to feel like they live and breathe. And in the sequential format in comics, you have the ability to do that, where you can actually tell these wonderful stories and just, and share, I think, with your readership, the adventures that you yourself are going through. When all is said and done, I feel that it's a bit of escapism for sure, but when you escape from this reality, where do you go to? Well, ideally, you go to another reality. And the reality, again, that you escape to is so profound and so deep that it becomes absolutely real. And the only thing that you need to do to tell your stories and to share them with another audience, your passport, to these make-believe lands of superheroes and vampires and adventurers in the 1920s, all you need is a pencil and a paper and the ability just to write them down and to share them. And in doing so, I think the world can be a much better place. So thank you for your time, and that's my presentation.